Welcome back to DisruptWell 2020. Next, we have Robert Dunnigan, who will bring us big data for humans. Robert has a long-standing fascination with data and decision-making, including the pitfalls that can occur through logical fallacies and statistical flukes. This led him to co-author Big Data Analytics, a practical guide for managers, published by CRC Press in 2015. He currently works with tax software for a global accounting firm and has extensively studied digital tax, an emerging data-intensive approach to increasing tax collection efficiency in countries throughout the world. You'll find his complete bio at DisruptWell.com. Janya and Evan Anderson will moderate the Q&A following his presentation. I encourage you to keep your questions coming in through the chat. Thank you for being with us, Robert.
Okay, well, thank you. So this is my first time back in the great state of North Dakota since COVID, and so I'm seeing, last time I was here, there was nobody wearing masks. A little story before I get started. I have an 11-year-old son. He's really into memes, and unfortunately I couldn't find it to put it up, but there's this meme where it shows a guy with a mask from a famous slasher movie, and he's shopping at a supermarket, and the caption is, this mask doesn't do much to protect you from COVID, but it's great for social distancing. So, big data for humans. Why is this discussion called Big Data for Humans? Well, I'm not telling for a while. So, why does big data matter to me? Well, you already live with it. We've seen that in some of the earlier discussions, so I won't go into it as deeply, but you can see it from when you have those advertisements that they discussed about the Fritos and the Doritos. That's part of that. You'll see it sometimes in insurance rate calculations. I get these little things saying because I'm good about paying my credit card, I can get a lower rate on my insurance. Somehow somebody knows all of that. Smartphone apps and maps, we discussed that. So why does it matter to me? These are some news stories over the previous few years where you can see where big data is important. Google purchasing buying MasterCard purchasing data for individuals. You have, there's a famous story where Target, actually using their loyalty program, figured out a young lady was pregnant before her family knew, and it wasn't even baby-related items. They just could figure it out because it correlated with baby-related items. You can see it coming into political campaigns, and it's going to be very, very big in agriculture. It's already becoming an issue. Several years ago, I was getting on an airplane and I purchased a Bloomberg Business Week magazine, and it had a picture of a John Deere tractor on the cover. I started reading it. It was saying that the average John Deere tractor had more lines of software code within it than the space shuttle did. When you start getting that kind of code happening, you start getting a lot of data that's generated, and I know that there's some work going on in Fargo at NDSU around some of the agricultural data. So I'm going to be taking a little bit different of an approach. I'm not saying, here's what the future may hold. I'm saying, okay, you have an organization and you know that this technology exists. How do you begin to think about it? And that's going to be more of the approach that I take here. But you can take a look about targeting marketing campaigns. Within quality control, some of the Six Sigma, one of my recent ASQ magazines from the American Society for Quality talked about using big data to get the data to drive quality improvement. You see it being used a lot in logistics and customizing service offerings. And here's an important one that we think should consider, and that's automating repetitive tasks. This came up in an earlier discussion. So your employees can focus on the more rewarding tasks. So you begin to automate things. I'm going to make us all read. No, I'm kidding. The idea behind this definition is more to what is big data? There's actually not a very clear definition. So this is one that my co-author Kim Prees and I came up with. But what you see is that it's something that's been coming about because you have much more powerful computer processors coming out, along with much more data storage and sensors, and then computer mediated transactions, whether between people or commercial transactions. Once you start doing that, you get the data and the ability to handle it. And so this has really been coming up primarily within about the last 10 years. So when you have a lot of data is a requirement to have big data, but it's not sufficient to have big data. So for example, you could have the biggest accounting system in the world, and that's not necessarily big data if it's all in tables. So think about, there's what's called the 3 V's, sometimes you see the 4 V's, but that would be the volume, velocity, and variety. So the volume, of course, is the quantity. The velocity is how quickly it's changing, how quickly new data is coming in. And then the variety is that you get different kinds of data. So you might have your accounting data, but it might be tied to some of your marketing data, some of your customer data. You might begin to pull some of this information in together, so it becomes a bit of a messier data set. And it is inseparable from analytics. So if you have all of this data sitting out there, you don't really call that big data. You just call it a really complex database. I'm not going to go into this in great detail, but this is Moore's law. And you can see how this is a logarithmic scale or semi-logarithmic. But what you'll see is that it goes from, this is 10 billion to 50 billion the transistors on an integrated circuit. But from the time I co-authored the book, which is right about here, you can see that that's already increased quite drastically because of the way that that is scaled. So it's an ongoing process. There are some questions about whether it's going to be able to be maintained for reasons of physics, but Moore's law, if it doesn't continue, there's other ways to continue increasing the processing power. There's also more data storage capacity at a lower price. You see this on servers. This could be in the cloud. You have, if you've heard of AWS, Amazon Web Services, that's in the cloud. Microsoft has some Azure in the cloud. You can also purchase your own servers. So the prices of those are coming down for the amount of, for the quantity of storage. And then I mentioned this earlier, the computer mediation of transactions and social interactions. When you send a text message, you're leaving a data point. When you are on social media, you're very much leaving a data point, and that was coming up in an earlier conversation. Blog comments, customer inquiries. So when you're thinking about how to apply it for your business, a customer inquiry is a computer-mediated transaction, and if you construct it right, you can get a lot more data than just what the customer is asking for. And then, of course, you have product searches, credit card transactions. You also have the density of sensors, agriculture equipment, as we mentioned, automotive computers. In production lines, there's a lot more monitoring that's beginning to happen, so you can spot things. There's actually, I don't have it on here, but there was, GE was working on a technology so that if an aircraft engine is beginning to fail a little bit, they can pick it up early in the process, and so somebody knows to go maintain it, and actually had these little cards you could drag across the screen to know what you needed to do. Smart thermostats, doorbell cameras. So you see that this is really something that is increasing. So this is really the meat of where I was trying to get to, and that's how should I use big data? So again, I'm taking the point of view, you're moving into this area with you have your company. And so I'm going to look at this as a less of a technical problem and more of a problem-solving issue. So take a realistic approach, start small, put processes first, make security central, which we just saw, and know your limits. So this is the Gartner hype cycle, and this is for this year, for 2020. Big data fell off of that in 2015. If I wanted to hype up big data, this would not be the time to do it. And that's actually a good thing, because what that means is that the technology is maturing, and people are learning its limits, and you're seeing a lot less hype. When I started co-authoring the book some years ago, there was a case that was in the news where a company that helped with the hiring process was finding that potential employees who were applying with Internet Explorer tended to not be as successful as employees using, at that time, Firefox and Chrome. And so when you went in and looked at what the press release was from the company, it was actually a very minor effect, and I don't even know if it's something that you could replicate later. Sometimes very small effects, they happen. But what you saw when the news hit it and the hype cycle hit it, there was an article that came out, and it's, you want to separate your real bummer employees from your star employees? Look at what web browser they use. Well, that is not what the study found. So, but as an organization, you're beginning to move into data, I would say don't move into big data first. I'd say first take a look at what you already have and how can you use that. So there's a couple of advantages to this, and one of them is that you're getting the low-hanging fruit. Low-hanging fruit, you don't need to go install a bunch of servers with Hadoop on it. You can just basically go pull off your data set, download it, throw it into Excel, and you can get some very valuable information. There's actually, in my own experience, there was a situation I was working on with Six Sigma, And I actually had a data set where basically I had to pick, is this certain condition met, yes or no? Okay, I'm gonna pick everything where it's no. I had 2 columns of data where everything meant no. And I was actually able to identify most of the really serious issues using 2 columns of data. That's a very, very small data set, very simple data set. And so as your team becomes more proficient in dealing with some of these smaller issues and getting the low-hanging fruit, you're beginning to build up some of the comfort level that will become very comfortable as they begin to work with teams putting in big data solutions. And I'm just going to use this as an example on simplicity, the beauty of simplicity. So when a child is born, one of the first things that a lot of the nurses will do in the delivery room, it's called the APGAR test. It's named after an anesthesiologist. Her name was Virginia APGAR. That now her name has become the acronym, but it was not originally. So it's a forced acronym. But you take these 5 characteristics of the child as it comes out, as it's born, and you review them, and then you review them just a short time later. That's a very simple rule of thumb. So one of the things to think about is that in my company, as I'm looking at my manufacturing process or my marketing process, maybe if I'm worried about customer retention, is there something where I can create a simple rule just off the data that I have, the data that I can use, that says when these sorts of activities begin to happen or these data points are tripped, what can I do to help resolve the problem ahead of time? And there most likely will be some of these that are going to be high value add for you. So, in putting the process first, this is what, as you begin to implement some of these, one of the things that you'll see is that you have, in science, you have physics. Physics is very unambiguous. The methods used to solve it are very precise. I know that there is going to be a solar eclipse. I should have actually reviewed when that's going to happen, but there's going to be a solar eclipse coming over my house in the Dallas area. So as that comes nearer, we're going to plan around that. That's been calculated for years. On the other side, you have what I call sort of the philosophy side. And I'm not slamming philosophy. I actually love philosophy. But it's something where you're solving ambiguous problems using ambiguous means. Data analytics is going to fall somewhere in the middle where you're solving ambiguous well, they might be well-defined problems, but how you apply the very precise methods can be ambiguous, and that can make all the difference in the world. When some of the issues that happened during the 2008 economic crisis, it was people selecting the wrong distribution of the numbers. It was a very, very minor, very nuanced mistake that they made, and it cost some of their investment firms a lot of money. So when I talk about the precise methods, I can never refrain from telling this story. So, yeah, you know this one. So, a computer programmer, he comes home from the grocery store. And he brings in the bags of groceries, and he's got 12 loaves of bread. His wife says to him, "You don't listen to me anymore." And he's saying, what do you mean? And she said, "I did not ask for 12 loaves of bread. This is not what I told you to get." And he said, "No, I did exactly what you asked me for. You said, go to the store, get me a loaf of bread, and if they have eggs, get me a dozen." So in implementing a project around data, and this is important always, but it becomes doubly important when you're dealing with data. Leadership is going to be key. Really good quality leadership, and part of this involves making sure that your team is aligned. So if you are the team leader, make sure that you are very well aligned, not only with the team working below you that you're in charge of, as well as the leadership of the organization with whom you're working. If you're the overall leader of the organization, make sure that everybody all the way down can repeat the objectives, the risks, some of the steps you're taking to mitigate the risks, and the definitions where necessary, because these can get out of line very quickly and at a very subtle level. And in fact, just maybe about a month ago, I was working on something where we'd reviewed a data set, we thought we understood it, and somebody came up and said, "I don't know if this means what we think it means." And it turns out that it may not have. So this was something where we were beginning to resolve that, and it was a very important one to resolve. And that ties into the second point. Seek corrective feedback consistently and make it so that it's a safe environment for anybody on your team to say, "You know, I thought that this meant this, and I don't know if it does." A few years ago, I was on another project where we're looking at tax data, what's called digital tax, and that's very data-intensive reporting that you will see happening in a lot of countries, especially in Latin America and Europe and parts of Asia now. And one of the things is that you have to send, in some instances, you have to send every single invoice as you generate it to the tax authority so that they can use that to make sure, they use it to basically tie against your other accounting data that they also ask for. And then they tie it to your customers and your vendors. Well, we're looking at an invoice date. You think an invoice date would be unambiguous. When you begin to compare how Mexico defines it to how Brazil defines it to how Chile defines it, it's no longer unambiguous. And so that was something that we ran into, and we did not expect it. It was something where somebody felt safe to say, hey, I don't think this means what I think it means. And then we had the discussion and realized that we weren't talking about the same thing between the different countries. And then use structured techniques early on. There's one, and I don't know where this originated, but it's called the pre-mortem, and I think it's a great idea. And the idea behind the pre-mortem is that you are starting a project, you're getting going, and you say, okay, we're 2 years from now and this project's failed. Why did it fail? And you begin to go through and explore why it may have failed. And so you float the ideas. It's a very structured way of floating how the ideas could have failed. And then you get the discussion happening so you can begin to head some of those problems off before you even begin the project. And then, of course, there's more technical methods. I'm not going to go into them here. I'm taking a look at more of a strategic level. But there are means that you can make sure that things are tested properly when you're doing some of the predictions. And I just listed some of the factors. Some of them relate to data. Some of them relate to formulas. Some of them relate to definitions. Some of them relate to data points that may be correct, but they don't tie together the way you think they tie together. So this one, we've just had an excellent discussion, so I won't go too far into it. But this, I'm dealing more here with the overall data breaches rather than specific acts of fraud against a bank account. So there's very clearly and very obviously technical means to avoid data breaches, but part of it is also how you strategically approach the problem. And data is only valuable when it's used, but using it is risky. So you have to make some balances, and you have to be strategic. So if there's an analysis that you really see no reason that you need, but some of the data would be risky if it were to get out there and would make you very uncomfortable if it ended up like this, it's sometimes best just to avoid doing that analysis. So anytime you use or move data, it can be very dangerous. So consider all of this very carefully. And one of the points I'd like to make is that one of the reasons why big data is so powerful but can also be very dangerous is that if you have a single data set, there's things you can read into that that can be damaging if it's leaked. You get 2 data sets and you get 3 data sets and 4 data sets and they can be tied to each other, then that's much more powerful. So if you have your MasterCard purchases plus your Google searches plus maybe something from social media where you talk about your family and your kids and the motorcycle you just bought, and you tie those all together, then that's a much more powerful set. And so that's where some of the big data can be extra risky if you lose control of it. I'm not going to go into this slide in great detail, but I'm tying it with the next slide to make a point that's going to come up in a minute. And that is that when you're doing data analytics, you need to know your limits. And to understand the limits, sometimes data analytics is presented, when you see it in the movies, somebody hits a button on a screen and they get the right answer or the wrong answer. And in reality, that's almost never the case. What you're getting is you're getting a probability that something is a certain way or not. But there's always these thresholds. You're having to draw a threshold at a level of risk that you are comfortable with that you may be getting the wrong answer. And so this one here is referring to basically the sensitivity of the test, the ability to detect something. And so what you need to do is you need to think about it that you're going to have the type 1 error, which is where you have a false positive, and a type 2 error, which is the false negative. The false positive, you find something that isn't there. The type 2, you miss finding something that is there. And this is the p-value. I'm going to jump through it. There's no need to go into it in great detail. But really, when you're taking a look at data analytics, a lot of times what's called the p-value is that's the probability that the results you got are just by accident. So what you want to do is get something, ideally you want to find something that's unlikely enough that the odds that it's just by accident are very small, in which case you think, well, it's probably the correct answer. So if you're looking at a distribution and you get off here, this is where there's a 5% chance that your results are by happenstance. And so you say, well, it's probably not happenstance, it's probably reality. So This is a study it's actually a study that came out in an online medical journal by John Juanidis. And when this study came out, it shook up a lot of not only the medical field, but also data analytics, big data. And the title is a little shocking: Why Most Published Research Findings Are False. Now, some of the things he goes through are not statistical. Some of them are questions of incentives. But I only included here some of the statistical ones. But basically what he was saying is that sometimes there's no attempt to go replicate the results. So if something is true, you should be able to do it more than once. He also referred to that negative results aren't reported. So if I were to go through with a medicine and I were to be testing it and it doesn't work, I don't go to the medical journal and say, hey, I didn't find anything. But sometimes that's actually very important. When I was in college at North Dakota State, go Bison, yes, I conducted a study. It was an honors thesis, and I had all these things, all of these different variables I studied, and I didn't find anything at all. So that happens, and that's valuable, because that means that you explored a path that it's not worth going down much further. So also flexibilities, referring here to you shouldn't be changing out your methods, because sometimes if you're changing your methods on how you're doing the research, what you're really measuring is your methods. You're not measuring the data underneath, because the method you used influences your results. And so this brings me to what I think is one of the key points I really wanted to hit, and that's Bayes' theorem. Thomas Bayes was a clergyman in Great Britain. And he came up with an idea about how the probability of one thing influences the probability of another. So what is the probability that medicine A has a side effect of giving me headaches? It might be 10%. But what are the odds of it giving me headaches if I'm taking medicine B at the same time? It might be 50%. So then you begin to use Bayes' theorem to take a look at, under the situation I'm using medicine B, what are the odds, the probabilities that medicine A will give me the headache? And I'm just going to quickly go through it without going through the math, but John Juanidis brought it up, and he didn't actually name Bayes' theorem, but he very clearly mentioned it. And what he is referring to is genetic studies. So if you have 100,000 polymorphisms that you're studying related to a particular disease, and the 10 of them may be related to it, I think the example he used was schizophrenia, then what is the probability if you get a study at a p-value of 0.05, which is 5%, there's a 5% chance that's an error. What are the odds that you actually found it if you get that result in your study? Well, it's actually only 0.12%. So what's happening is that the odds of your study getting the right results, or getting the results you were expecting by accident, are higher than the results that what you found is actually real. So what this is showing is that sometimes the odds of you finding what you're looking for might be so tiny, you think you found it, but you haven't. Now, if you think about how this may apply to big data analytics, what happens if you are an agribusiness and you're sourcing from different farmers, and there's 10,000 different fields that they're pulling something out of, and you run into something and you want to figure out what the characteristics are of the field that it came out of, and it's a rare characteristic? You're very likely going to get the wrong answer. And this will also come up in medicine and other areas. So this one here is a little bit fun, and is my penultimate slide. There's a page here by a gentleman named Tyler Vigen, and it's called Spurious Correlations. So what he does is when you take enough different variables and you analyze them, and this is the danger of data mining, when you take enough different variables and you begin to compare them against each other, you get to that 5% p-value I was pointing out. There's about a 5% chance, if that's your limit, that you're going to have a wrong result. So here he compares number of films that Nicolas Cage has appeared in against the number of people who drown by falling into a pool. They correlate quite nicely. Worldwide non-commercial space launches against sociology doctorates awarded in the US, they correlate quite nicely. Letters in the winning word of the Scripps National Spelling Bee against number of people killed by venomous spiders. They correlate very well. And the divorce rate in Maine against the per capita consumption of margarine. They also correlate very well. So I avoided answering this question at the beginning. So why is the discussion big data for humans? Well, Big data is not an oracle. I think it's better than an oracle and more powerful than an oracle. It's a tool. In fact, when I was trying to think of titles for this lecture, or for this discussion, I should say, I was thinking, how do I compare this? How do I make this sound great? And one of the answers I floated was not an oracle, but better than that, a screwdriver, but that just didn't have the right ring. But it is a tool, and a tool can be better than an oracle, better than something that just gives you the right and wrong answers, because it gives you an exploration. It gives you a way to develop new skills, and that when you see something that doesn't quite look right, you can explore a new path. When you see something that does look right, then you can begin to dive into it even deeper. So big data is very much a human endeavor, and I think that that's what makes it great. So thank you. And I think we have 4.5 minutes.
Yes. I think you're avoiding the hard questions, Robert. I don't know.
So the airspeed velocity of the unladen swallow?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the first question.
African or European? Well, I thought we'd lead off with this, and this may be the only one we'll get a chance for, but you have already self-confessed that you are from North Dakota.
Yes.
You went to NDSU, so you're very familiar with our state. When you think about big data and the industries that are most prevalent in our state, where do you see the biggest applications, do you think, for big data here?
I think hands down it's going to be agriculture, and there's already a lot of work going into that with precision agriculture, with I think that looking at the marketing of agriculture, there's a lot of potential for it. And then, of course, North Dakota is a very agricultural state, but we're much more diverse than people understand. And so what we've seen is a lot about marketing today, for example.
Yeah.
Marketing is going to be a huge area for big data. It's just, again, we need to understand where the limits are. But once we understand the limits, then a lot of worlds open up.
I think the energy industry uses a lot
That's
of big
true.
data as well. You showed us the hype graph.
Yes.
Now that big data has kind of fallen off the hype thing, where do you see it landing right now in terms of, kind of when it gets past the hype, where's it settling into, and is that the right place?
I think it's becoming just more of a tool, and I think that that's a good thing. When I used to go into Barnes & Noble, I spend way too much time at Barnes & Noble. I actually told them that they need to buy me insurance because when I die, their stock price is going down. But I used to go through sometimes the business section, and one of the things that I would see is big data this, big data that, big data, and you don't see that as much, but I don't think that's a bad thing, because what was happening is a lot of the expectations were unrealistic, and sometimes people would just, I've spoken to friends of mine who worked on projects where the idea was, let's just implement big data. Well, you can't just implement big data. You have to be strategic about it. Where is it? How do you need it? And now that that hype is gone, I think that expectations are much more realistic. And when they're realistic, you have the chance to really develop valuable tools.
Perfect. So I'm going to go a little off script here too. So we talked a little bit earlier. We had the college president speak to us. If someone listened to you and said, this big data thing, this sounds pretty cool, I could get into this, what courses of study would you encourage them to pursue?
I would first start with, I would say, the statistical side of it, because that gives you an appreciation for the possibilities and the limits. I don't know that there's necessarily a course of study of just looking at data that's separate from statistics, but
Right.
taking a look at how data is modeled, how you will store the data, that's very important. And I'd say something at a high level with around computers, computer science, and then maybe studying a statistical language. I'm not a coder, so when my wife asks me for, a dozen eggs, if she asks for them, and a loaf of bread, I come back with a dozen eggs and a loaf of bread. But I studied R, which is a programming language. It's a statistical language, and just learning that was very helpful because it showed me, again, some of the limitations, but from a different angle, from some of the coding things and some of the things that can go wrong. I actually one time spent an entire afternoon because I put a parenthesis in the wrong place. And I was troubleshooting it, and I couldn't find it, and couldn't find it, and couldn't find it. And then I found, oh, wait, this is supposed to be over, a mirror image for me. It's supposed to be over here, and it's over here. So that that's a little bit eye-opening, and so it gives you an appreciation that when you're working with people, one of the things that I can't believe I forgot the energy industry, because a project that I worked on at one point was for an energy services company, and we're taking a look at hydraulic fracturing data, and we weren't necessarily analyzing it, but we were working with it. Some of them were calculated fields, and so what I would do is I would pull out a large sample every once in a while of what our team was coding, and I would calculate, is this coming up with the right answer? And so having done some coding myself, even if not at a deep level, really gave me the appreciation to go in and look for that.
Awesome.
Robert, we're just pretty much out of time, but real quickly, what is, in your experience, what's kind of the coolest or most maybe disruptive application or use of big data that you've seen?
I think it goes back to the discussion about marketing. And there's going to be a lot of promise, and I think also some peril in that, because of the privacy issues, because big data, it sometimes can give you the wrong results, but when it gives you the right results, sometimes they can have insights that you cannot imagine. The case of the young lady who is purchasing things like hand lotion and things like that at Target that triggered the system. The one other thing I would say is that there's always the possibility where you can end up, and this was alluded to in the most recent one on the legal aspects of it, if you have biased data, you can end up triggering something, and I could see the potential for really damaging people's lives if that's not handled. So I say that the promise and the peril are going to be, as we implement big data, tie it to probably, I would say, artificial intelligence or machine learning, and things that affect people's lives.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Our final panel today is appropriately titled Moving Forward from COVID-19 Disruption. So as our panelists are coming up, I'll do quick introductions. Dr. Doug Jensen became the 7th president of Bismarck State College on July 1st, 2020. Prior to BSC, he served as president at Rock Valley Community College in Illinois, and before that as the president of the Alabama Technology Network in the Alabama Community College system. Dr. Michael LeBeau serves as the president of the Sanford Health Bismarck Region, overseeing the administration of health services and successful planning and implementation of operational and strategic goals for the Bismarck region. He has been with Sanford Health for more than 10 years. And Justin Walsh is the CTO and co-founder at CoSchedule, the fastest growing startup in North Dakota. CoSchedule has been included on the Inc. 5000 as one of the fastest growing companies in America for the last 3 years, and was ranked as the best business tool built by a startup on entrepreneur.com. All three of these gentlemen, as you can see, are with us in person today. Deb Seminary will serve as the moderator for this discussion. Please continue to send your questions in on the chat, and thank you, gentlemen, all for being here.
All right.
Yes, thank you. Sorry for this is the first time we've had 4 people up here, and I love it. I'm so excited. So thanks for being here with us. And thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. I'm excited to talk about some of the most talked about industries and business categories during this period of the pandemic: healthcare, education, and workforce. So we've heard a lot today about how businesses have rapidly changed. And one of the things that we've also heard is how sometimes it's for the better. And that reminded me of a Winston Churchill quote, which is, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." So what organizations resisted for decades is now key to survival and innovation. And I'm gonna ask specific questions and then some general ones. So first, Dr. Jensen, we'll start with you. Since you began your tenure at BSC on July 1st, you kind of jumped right into the planning that was already going on for how school would look in the fall for your students. Talk about the process BSC went through to make sure it was safe for students to return to campus.
Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here, and appreciate the opportunity to share in this important conversation. The process we went through was basically multidimensional. One of the things we looked at was our campus readiness. Facility-wise, were we prepared to be able to operate under the additional health and safety conditions that we needed to plan for? The second thing we looked at was what was the needs and demands of the customers we serve, our stakeholders. And we looked at that in individual. And one of the things we found was that 70% of the students expressed an interest of wanting to be on campus in some type of relationship. So that was something we really we held on to. The third thing we looked at was what kind of support were we going to be able to receive from the community in terms of being a partner. Not only what support would we receive to be able to make this type of commitment to being open, but also what would we be able to do in return to support those organizations that were relying on us. We planned that, we looked through that process, we put together a multi-layer, what we call a multi-layer or multi-dimensional plan where we looked at the same things that all of us are looking at. You know, the washing your hands, using your mask, proper hygiene, et cetera. But we looked at those in terms of force multipliers. It's important to use good hand care, hand washing. But it's also important to use masks. When you start putting those together, then you start getting a force multiplier. But it's also a force multiplier in terms if you wear the mask appropriately, if you wash your hands appropriately, those all become force multipliers. Then we looked at technology, communication. We have an app that we use that tells us a lot about where we're at and where we're traveling. So the one big takeaway for us, I think we learned, is this really pushed our communication system. It pushed our ability to communicate rapidly and quickly with others, not only in the organization, but outside the organization.
Thank you. Dr. LeBeau, tell us how Sanford prepared for the pandemic and what were some of the areas that were most affected?
This is a question that we get frequently, and I love the Winston Churchill quote. It's something that we've really embraced. You know, difficult times, but I think we're going to become better as healthcare providers across the state because of it. A simple one, obviously, is telemedicine. It's been something we've been talking about in North Dakota for 25 years. And it was very expensive. It's been very difficult. Well, I'll tell you an example of telemedicine is we do a year's worth of telemedicine visits that we did pre-COVID each week. Wow. And so if you talk about a springboard, and so if you springboard off that, it really is how do you deliver care? And North Dakota is a rural state. I think it really gives us kind of the running start that we needed to change our treatment models. And so how we care for people at home, you know, how do we limit travel? How do we get specialists into people's homes? I think that's a big one. Another simple one is how do you check into a hospital? If you've been into our facilities, you know, the lines in a hospital at 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning can be, you know, 100 deep. Well, that seems inappropriate with COVID, and there's no way you're going to social distance with lines like that. And so it really forced us to change the check-in process, something you would just take for granted. But, you know, during this, it really allowed us the opportunity to deep dive and to really think about how you just make lives or people's lives simpler when they come to see us. Last one in that I think of is our app, you know, our One Chart, Sanford One Chart. And so how do we increase functionality of that app and really kind of get caught up with today's times? And so we offer more functions, more features associated with that, more scheduling times to make lives or people's lives a little more predictable.
Sure. Justin, I have heard CoSchedule's work environment is fairly flexible. What changed at CoSchedule when the pandemic hit?
Excellent question. You know, we were fortunate in many categories, technology probably being the biggest, where we were hearing stories of business owners and IT departments that were trying to figure out where to buy 100 laptops because their workforce needed to work from home for a while. And they had not had a culture where mobility was vital. You know, in our line of work, we've always had video conferencing and laptops and instant messenger between our offices in Bismarck and Fargo. So we were really set up to basically flip the switch. When the schools decided to a full distance, it really was the tipping point for us as an office. There was just too much, there were too many families that were going to be put in a very tough spot to figure out, how are they going to do distance education, what's going to happen there. So we just closed the office. We stayed closed for about 2.5 months. The day we made the announcement, we told the staff, go ransack the office. Take your desk, take your monitor, take everything you need to be productive and comfortable at home, because we knew it was probably going to be a while. And that was, it worked. For 2.5 months, we did the best we could with the circumstances. We had no layoffs. We actually continued to hire. We onboarded people completely remote, which was something between our two offices we were pretty good at already. So I think we were early adopters of a lot of technology norms that saved us a lot of heartache, honestly, once the pandemic hit, where we heard a lot of stories where people wanted to work, they would have worked from home, but they just didn't have the flexibility or options because their employers were in older, rigid systems. And so really blessed. I mean, sitting here today, we have our entire team. We've maintained well, I would say, through the face of all of the adversity that's come our way.
Awesome. The message about ransacking your office reminds me of a story that I read online about somebody thinking about all the food they had left in their drawer and what it was going to look like when they get back to the office finally. Yep. So that was really nice of you to let them have the opportunity to get all the food out of their drawers. Mm-hmm. So Dr. LeBeau, you talked a little bit about the telemedicine adoption, how that jumped up, pushed up by years, and how many appointments you're having now. But there had to be other areas where you saw big jumps.
Well, I was fascinated by the last presentation, big data. It's something that I think when you think about a data-driven organization, what does it mean? So we've been on that journey for approximately 5 years. And as we were discussing, it was 18 months really just to put the governance in. It seems like a simple process, and when you get in, obviously you need people with expertise to drive it. So the one thing we've really been able to capitalize on is our enterprise, and really being part of a bigger organization. We're really able to get real-time data, including number of beds, number of ventilators, how many open beds, ICU beds. I think that all helps with planning. One of the interesting things, the other part, is artificial intelligence. And so when you talk about modeling COVID patient numbers, it's been a pretty hit and miss thing across the country, and there's been lots of different models. And so our data analytics team built an artificial intelligence that really predicts number of COVID patients. And so each day of COVID, it learns. And if you look at our run rate now, we feel very comfortable, at least in a 14-day window, to expect number of admissions, number of patients, number of events, and it really is just a form of artificial intelligence. I think a couple of other things, that are less disruptive, but I think very important, is universal precautions. We think about universal precautions, and the example I always use is boarding an airplane. If you went back 20 years, we took boarding airplanes for granted. You walked in, jogged through, you jumped on the plane, and then 9/11 hit. And how we board an airplane today is different. And so it's really, I think, forced us into thinking about what universal precautions look like. Because if you can conquer universal precautions, now you can treat a COVID patient just as we would an influenza patient, just as we would a tuberculosis patient. And I think it's important that we get those lined up for the future.
That's a great analogy. Justin, how did the users of your products and services change? And was there an increase, decrease in demand? Did they ask for different products, services, and were you able to deliver?
Excellent. Yeah, there certainly was. I would say there's two sides to that coin. We had an increase in demand in certain categories, business-to-business categories, large institutions, big brands that were all of a sudden in the spotlight during COVID or whose businesses were increasing because of the status of the economy and just where people were spending. We certainly saw more business in those categories, but on the other side of the coin, we saw huge upsets in travel, leisure, entertainment. Even today, still see that across certain categories where customers have just had to cancel their subscription with us and our products because their entire marketing team might have been laid off. And so there's been, kind of widespread ripples in software, and depending on what category and what type of business you run, you're going to feel differently. We're lucky. We're in productivity, and with all of the people moving to work from home, we end up weathering that storm quite well, simply because the need for communication tools and solutions for keeping that team on track and keeping people organized is all the greater when they're not in the same office sharing the same whiteboard with the same Post-it notes. And so those types of businesses were looking for solutions, many of which came to CoSchedule, which was an unintended consequence of the pandemic. Again, just the impacts in a situation like this you can never predict. I remember sitting in an office in March, at the very beginning of March, trying to figure out what a budget looks like if this hits North Dakota, if this hits the world as much as we thought it was going to. And you can never really prepare, and so we started hunkering down, and we're here today, and our sales are picking back up. Things are somewhat returning to normal. Our staff is 98% back in our office now. But yeah, time will tell, in terms of how much impact it truly has to our business.
And I'm sorry, I should have, everybody knows BSC, Sanford. What does CoSchedule do?
Sure. So we're a software company based out of North Dakota. We're a 100% North Dakota homegrown team, very proud of that fact. My business partner, Garrett Moon, and I are originally from North Dakota and started the company now over 7 years ago. This is our second company together. CoSchedule really solves a problem for marketing teams. We help marketing teams all over the world stay organized and be productive through different software solutions. We've got a number of different products that we sell as a subscription through the cloud, through the internet. Those businesses all over in about 100 different countries log in daily to CoSchedule to plan out their work, their projects, organize all their assets, and in a world that we're in today, stay effective as a team.
Great. Dr. Jensen, this is a kind of a two-part question. I know you talked about 75% wanted to get back onto campus. Based on what you've seen in the last few months, what do teachers and students prefer? And then also, because of what we've heard today and the massive changes that are going on in the workforce, are there curriculum changes that you see ahead as the demand for certain types of workers increases?
Yes, well, thank you. I think I mentioned the demand for our student population. They want a hands-on, they want a close proximity to the classroom, to the resources that are on the campus. I think that's very important to them. And I kind of tell a quick little story around that. Being new to Bismarck, one of the things is that you walk around town, people can very quickly see that you're lost. And somebody will come up and they will introduce themselves and they'll say, "Can I help you?" And they say, "Yes, I'm looking for whatever." And then they'll turn around and they'll say, "What brings you to town?" And I tell them, Bismarck State College. And we don't go much further than that, but right away, the person wants to tell me a story. They want to tell me about an experience. They want to tell me about, some of these stories are 40 years old. So what makes a person go up to a stranger 40 years later and talk about an experience that they had? It touched them. And I think that's very important in this time, that we don't lose sight of that, that touch point. We were talking about authors and so forth, but it's like Maya Angelou talks about people won't remember what you say, but they'll remember how you make them feel. And that's what I think our students are looking for. Now, we have a very diverse student population. We're not a traditional, university setting. We have students that are anywhere from 16 years of age to 86 years of age. So we have a very diverse population. So what we're seeing from our students is not one message. It's generational. A lot of our adult students are looking for the flexibility of online. A lot of our younger adult students are looking for that relationship. They're looking to build that spontaneous engagement where they can build the assets and the connections that they need to move forward. In terms of technology and affecting our future instruction, that was going to occur without COVID. As many of you are aware, Bismarck State College is on a new journey. We have been selected to have an expanded mission to be North Dakota's Polytechnic institution, and that's very important to us. So as we start looking at fulfilling that mission need, we realize that how we are going to deliver instruction in the future is going to be very different. The idea that it'll be 2 16-week semesters will probably be pushed and challenged. The idea that we don't have classes in the summer will be pushed and challenged. The idea that we'll have stackable credentials, pathways that will allow people to engage and have partnerships. How we build partnerships with industry to make sure that people are getting the educational experience they need at the same time that they're gaining the work experience. We can't hold people back from being engaged in their career path while we're waiting to educate them. So we were on a course to be changing the future of how we deliver education, and that was going to occur with or without the pandemic. The only thing the pandemic did, as Dr. LeBeau mentioned a moment ago, was it was an accelerator. It has forced some things to the forefront that were going to occur naturally. These disturbances were naturally out there. They were going to occur, but the COVID condition kind of accelerated that and just put us in a position where we had to confront some of those changes earlier.
Great. Now this question is for all, and we can start, if anyone has any questions in the audience too, you can start asking questions. So, and I'll let you decide who's going to go first, okay? But nothing spurs opportunity and or creativity like people experiencing problems. What are examples of some awesome innovation in your organization because of the challenges of COVID-19?
Good start.
You know, one of the things about CoSchedule's culture is just how close we are, how tight-knit we are as a team. When everybody went work from home, you know, we had the technology in place. There was not a great deal of innovation in terms of our company structure that had to happen, except we had to find a way to replace that interconnectivity amongst ourselves and how we were going to stay united as a team. And so several of our team members just on their own started doing scheduled events that you could tune into Zoom for. And one of my favorites was a tour of, I think it was a goat farm. I tuned in and there were just goats in my meeting. And so these like kind of routine weekly coffee breaks were a great release for the team to just sort of reconnect, talk about something other than work in a meeting where it was appropriate, where it was encouraged and allowed, but kind of remember, you know, the humanity of people in our company and in our team. And so, yeah, I'm not gonna forget the goat tour, but one of our team members went to this farm, I think, with a laptop and knew the farmer, and they showed them around. And it was just a unique experience, and there were many other stories like that throughout the months that we were working from home. But I thought that was a really unique way that the team just sort of, on their own, stepped up in a way to fill that need.
All right, top the goat farm.
I was gonna say, that's a tough one to follow. I think in my mind, I think it really is cementing the importance of putting the patient in the center of care. I think we could all use it for customers. And how do you keep culture? How do you describe things? For me, it really is the expansion of home monitoring. We work really hard to deliver care, you know, the right care at the right place. And so we say it, but many times it's difficult. If you think about managing a COVID patient, you know, most COVID patients do fine. And most COVID patients that have symptoms do fine. And the people that don't usually will have plenty of warning along the way. And so everybody shouldn't have to be in the hospital because it's scary, but we got to be able to reach out and support them. And so it really, home monitoring was really our ability to connect with the patient in their home, was to give them the new technology. We've actually presented right at DisruptWell before Title Care, where we can deliver care at home. We can look in your ears and nose, home oxygen monitoring. And if you look at the new, you know, the new Apple Watch, we can actually now monitor oxygen levels, blood pressure. But most importantly, it really is offering the technology, and it might be just FaceTime, where we can just have a conversation with you in your home. How are you doing? And keep people at home.
Great. Dr. Jensen?
For us, I think it really brought back the grounding us in student success. Many places talk about student success, but we also talk about academic success. And I think the line has gone too far just to focusing on academic success and not really understanding the importance of student success. And I think that's helped us come back to the idea that many of our students are facing challenges that go beyond the classroom. There are academic issues. A lot of times we'll say, well, a student is struggling because of maybe a math class or maybe because of a certain skill set. But really behind that is life, and something happens in life. It might be a transportation issue. It might be a housing issue. It might be a relationship issue. It might just be an illness that we're talking about. And so when you look at that as understanding how important it is to be able to support people during those times, especially when your resources are being stretched. And how do you stay connected with that individual and regain the focus and make sure that we have a real clear plan to keep the students at the center of all that we do? Because that's what our business is all about, is student success. And as we got distance and as we got challenged, we had to make sure that we came back to that core fundamental principle that we need to gain respect and understand the things that they're facing and the challenges that they're facing, and they're balancing all of that in the midst of life.
Thank you. We have a question?
Dr. Jensen, LeBeau, and Justin, thank you for taking time from your busy schedules to share your wisdom with us today. The two common themes that have been important for DisruptWell the past 4 years is the role and opportunities that emerging technologies present, and then as an offshoot, workforce development opportunities that are presented because of not just emerging technology change and opportunities, but disruption generally speaking. So from that platform, I want to ask you kind of a double-layered question here. The first is, if you look forward the next 5 to 7 years, and there are students that are leaving middle school, for example, getting ready for high school, or high school students getting ready for college, what curricula would you recommend that might be appropriate for them to focus more on now than they would have maybe 5 years ago, number one, that fit what you're going through? And then secondly, the role of the soft skills, the ability to public present, ask questions, sell, close, those kind of things, and how you see those playing an important role as well. Thank you.
Well, I'll start first this time. I think one of the major skill sets is that 60 to 70% of all the jobs in the future are going to require some type of coding experience. If we are not teaching coding as early in the educational pathway as possible, I think we're doing a real disservice to our students. I think we're doing a disservice to our community, and I think we're doing a disservice to our country. That will be a major skill set moving forward. Teaching individuals how to use coding and how they can become starters of their own businesses. They can provide a valuable asset. That I think is going to be critical. And I think we need to figure out how to build those partnerships as early as possible when we're talking about our K-12 community, the higher education community, and also how does that align with our private sector partners. No one will be able to go alone in the future. But I was going to add, I'm glad you added it to it, but I was going to say the other skill set is soft skills. We have to help people understand how do they communicate and how they interact with each other. I tell a lot of students when I talk to them on a daily basis, if you don't spend time today building relationships, you will spend the rest of the week restoring relationships. And that is a skill set that we have to help people understand that is very valuable. Because if you want to be a good coder, you're going to have to be able to have good relationships. If you want to be a good nurse, you're going to have good patient communication. I know there's a very innovative, I learned about Sanford, was called your sit-down minute, where you go into a room and it's intentional that the healthcare provider actually sits down, and Dr. LeBeau quotes some very powerful statistics on that. And I think that goes back to that soft skills relationship.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the soft skills portion. What we have discussions about is if we have a great relationship it becomes much easier to do Zoom, do whatever you do, right? I mean, you figure it out. But how do you build relationships? And I think all of us, you know, as we look at our companies, how do you set your culture? And so new hires, what are you going to do to indoctrinate them into expectations of the group? And as you kind of perpetuate your business's vision, are people going to believe it? And are you going to be as believable as you can be online? And so I love the idea of the communication piece. If I'm thinking about, out of all the things I could get in front of a sophomore in high school, it'd be the communication skills. And not just communication as we know it, right? I mean, we all went to speech class, we all went, but how do you communicate? What are going to be the rules online? What are going to be your presentation skills to really go forward? I love the innovation piece. You know, a perfect example is, I mean, as we sit, we work very closely with BSc students. And so we want to offer, you know, school opportunity education. We want to develop workforce. And so as we teach folks and as we move forward, and it doesn't have to just be in healthcare. We all have needs for all trades. I think as we look at our trades, I think we can reach out, and I think it's going to be probably more partnerships going forward.
I like Dr. Jensen's answer. Computers, I mean, it's a completely self-serving answer, but computer science in our line of work continues to be the #1 field that we're going to be fighting for. In hiring, in retention, in every way, it is the thing that is really one of the lifebloods in our business is, being able to recruit both computer programmers, but also graphic designers and writers and creative professionals of all kinds. So really having a firm understanding of any of those things coming out of school is excellent. But one of the things that we look for when we're hiring isn't how much you know, it's how good are you at teaching yourself. Like what did the education system do to really promote and encourage your ability to self-teach? Our field and our profession moves incredibly fast, and the stars in our company and the stars in other companies are often the people who are learning for the sake of the rest of the team and then bringing that knowledge and information back in. That's a culture that I love that we have at CoSchedule, where our team is very much contributors to things like open source software projects that they're passionate about, and then bringing that sort of passion back into the company. So I think it's encouraging that type of activity and finding and hiring people who's maybe in the soft skills side, they're just self-starters. They're sort of entrepreneurial. They'll start within the company, new endeavors, new initiatives. They'll gain the buy-in. They'll sell it. You talk about a soft skill. It isn't just hard selling something, but being a natural salesperson can't hurt when it comes to presenting your ideas to your coworkers and your peers. And so, all of those facets of soft skills that are things that we look for are going to be the things that we continue to look for and double down on.
Sure, thank you. Evan?
So our title for this panel today is Moving Forward from the COVID-19 crisis or pandemic. So do a little science fiction departure here and talk about alternate timelines and compare basically a non-COVID 3 to 5 years from now compared to COVID future 3 to 5 years from now for your business or your industry.
The last time we had him lead off, it was hard to follow. I think I'll take a run at that. So I think pre-COVID, COVID didn't exist. I think we had lots of stuff in place that we thought we were being innovative with. Direct scheduling, patient-centered practice, programs that extend primary care to others, visiting specialists. We were in telemedicine. I think all of those would have continued, and I think there was still plenty of innovation. I think COVID has probably changed our vision of what innovation means in healthcare. I think one of the great things that's going to come out of COVID is really getting back to the patient, but not just from provider to patient. I think that's already there. Not just hospital to patient, but really all people in healthcare. And so I think 3 to 5 years from now, because of COVID, we're going to be thankful that we're going to have more wellness programs.
Nice.
I think if you look at behavioral health, I think it's always something we struggle with delivery of care. I think with the stress of COVID, with increasing anxiety, increasing depression around COVID, I think it becomes much more important to deliver behavioral health and just general well-being. I think cooperation. You know, I always take these opportunities since COVID has started to really thank our state. You know, if you look at our testing numbers, if you look at our programs, if you look at our coordination of care, I think we've done a really remarkable job as a state to be out front leading the way. And then amongst hospitals, I think it's important to compete. I think we're better off for competition, but not at the expense of patients. And so it's fairly humbling to sit with all of your counterparts and to really say, how do we come together and serve our patients? And I think 5 years from now, I think we'll be better and better suited to think overall the big picture of just general wellness.
I'm going to take a little liberty with that question because I think 3 to 5 years from now, what scares me or what I'm concerned about looking forward, a lot of people ask me, Doug, how do you what do you worry about? What keeps you up at night about COVID? To be quite honest with you, COVID does not really concern me too much. It will pass. What's really got me concerned about the next disruption is the amount of financial debt that our families are taking on in terms of higher education and the amount of obstacles we're putting up to individuals to be able to achieve those kind of skill sets that they are going to need to be successful in the economy. And that's really what's starting to worry me. Will there be barriers in the next 3 to 5 years that'll be financial in nature, or that individuals will have to live with for 15, 20 years after they complete school, with the amount of financial debt that families are taking on and the amount of financial debt some of our students are taking on. And I'm worried about what that disruption is going to do. And I don't know what the end of that disruption looks like. Where COVID, I have a little bit more confidence that, like 9/11, will the world be different, as Dr. LeBeau said, going through an airport? Yes. Will the world be different after COVID? Yes. But I'm really concerned about the demand that our country and our community needs for talent, as we were just talking about. How is that going to be impacted as we start looking at the financial impacts that are occurring, and how our families are going to be stressed because of the ability not to afford education or to be able to do it in such a way that it doesn't leave people financially strapped for years to come?
Yeah, I think 3 to 5 years is a while, but one of the things that I hope will be a lasting change is the wake-up call a lot of businesses have had on their culture. There are a lot of places you can work that have very inflexible, time off policies or work from home options if you have childcare dilemmas, or one of the things we did when the hybrid system of education came about for many of our families was just present us an alternate work schedule. I don't really care when you do your time or hours for your job, just let us know what your plan is. And having that type of flexibility for your staff is going to become normal. I hope it does, because I think that's one of the things that many businesses really shook up on, is that all of a sudden people's lives were really in turmoil during the pandemic, and businesses had to give first. We have work from home stipends. We did technology audits. We helped people get their Wi-Fi up to speed, and got them bigger internet plans or shipped them routers, or whatever it was that was a problem. That was now the table stakes if this was going to be how we did business. I think in 3 to 5 years that's going to become the normal conversation, for most businesses, mostly because the employees will be expecting it. I think in a lot of ways, expectations have changed. We don't necessarily fully know how widespread those expectation changes are, but they are there, and that will be a very lasting impact from COVID.
Thanks. You kind of stole my last question, Evan, which is fine. I mean, it was talking about moving forward. So I'll backtrack a little bit because we're almost out of time. And hopefully you can come up with something to this question. But were there issues that came up that made you scratch your head a little bit? Things that you never could have imagined would be a problem?
Chicken strips.
Chicken strips?
We take supply chain for granted. I think it's something that, I think it's shocking. You know, the medical piece, the PPE, I understand. You know, alcohol, hand washing, gowns. But there's so many things that are delayed, and this is across all industries. I think it was really shocking when you talk about a wake-up call. I think that most companies will be better with supply chain and really understanding, you know, the process was something that I think really caught me off guard.
So kids couldn't have chicken strips then?
Yeah, just, you know, food. I mean, there's a lot of different things that, you know, that we couldn't get and just stuff that we probably hadn't really thought about.
Sure.
State of behavioral health and just emotional health of people. Yeah, even close to home for me, just the feeling of disconnectedness as a family. I have 4 kids at home with my wife, and we certainly had that sort of like shelter syndrome where we just needed to get out of the house. And I remember watching the governor in one of the press conferences say, you don't forget where you live. Like, go for a hike, go for a walk, go fishing, like get out of the house. And I remember that was really a war cry for my family too, to do that, because it was something that I never really would have anticipated, is just the need for being so intentional in a situation where you can't hang out with your family, you can't see your friends, but to, you know, sort of be intentional about your own wellness and really taking it into account and being proactive about it.
And I would agree. I think it's the mental health question. I know that it's always been out there, but I think it just came up so quickly in front of everybody over a very short period of time. And the more we need to do, and maybe how we were not as prepared as we should have been for that. That was probably the one thing that I've sat back and reflected on, is what do I need to do to make sure that those resources are in place moving forward? Because I think this was just a symptom of, there will be something beyond COVID that will come up, and there'll be some lessons learned here. But the mental health, I think, is something that has really affected families. And as life has gone on and people have the normal challenges of life, but now they have these medical challenges and they can't go to their family, their inner circle, if they need help with childcare. Normally they might rely upon their sister or their brother or their mother or their grandmother, and all of that gets disrupted very, very quickly. And we found out how vulnerable I think we were.
Those are all good points. And I'm going to wrap it up just a couple minutes early, if you don't mind. And I thank you all for your expertise. You brought up some great points, and I appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We will now turn to voting for the Innovation Challenge. So I welcome the Innovation Challenge people up to carry on.
All right. Nice seeing you again, my friend.
Hey, you too.
Okay. Are we good? Oh, we're good.
Yep, we're good. All right. Well, hopefully you guys have been paying attention today to the 3 videos for our 3 winners and are all ready to vote for your favorite. You'll need to grab your phone, and this slide will show you. So we've got the 3 winners. We showed the videos in the order of SAF Power, Set Your Rent, and then BioShield. So now is the time. We're only going to take voting for a short period of time. So vote for your favorite, and then we will award that enormous check.
Yes. So just remember, all 3 are winners.
Yes.
We are just, we chose them, our panel of judges, our team said these are our winners, but now you get to choose, of those 3, who do you want to see holding the big check up here? Oh, I was going to say, this is small data. This is not big data. No. Ooh. Oh. Wait, how does that happen?
It's a relative scale.
Oh,
This is
got
big
it.
data. Maybe we need Robert up here.
I know. Robert, we need to correlate this to sunspots or something. No. Well, as long as, see?
It's right there.
There it is.
Oh, this is kind of fun.
No, this is scary. Is everyone feeling nervous? It's going,
Then what do we call it?
That's what, I think we call it at do we call it exactly at 2:30? So there are 5 more seconds.
No, we'll give it
Oh, we're gonna
30
give
more seconds.
30 more seconds. Okay, 30 more seconds.
Hit those numbers.
All right, I'm gonna go get the big check.
Okay.
Okay. Everybody's phoning their families right now. Okay, the code is this.
All right, we're down to 10 seconds. Things aren't moving much at this point, so it's probably.
Ooh,
whoa, look at that. A big
They're messing with you in the booth, yeah.
Okay, that's it. So
That's it.
we have BioShield roofing systems.
Please,
Come on up, you guys.
Come on up here, guys.
Keep them over there.
All right.
Why don't you guys pose in front of that? Congratulations, you guys.
Fantastic.
All right.
All right. If we could also get
Yes.
Ashley and Adam to come
Yes,
up.
let's get our other.
We need our other, because again, they are all
Let's
winners.
give all of these winners a round of applause.
Yeah, they're amazing.
Come on up here, guys.
Innovating North Dakota. Woo.
Yeah.
Oh, you're gonna make them
Gonna
talk.
say a few words? Well, go ahead, camera.
Camera, anybody, Marlo.
And I'll say a few words. Yes.
All right.
He's got the mic. Somebody has to say a few words.
We just want to say, like, thank you for the opportunity to come here. We've had a fabulous time listening to all of the presenters. And yesterday, when we had the opportunity to give our presentation, we learned an incredible amount, and we still have a lot of work to do and a lot more things to learn. And it's just been a great experience overall, and I'm so lucky to have been here. So I don't know if you guys have anything else, but.
You're good. You're off the hook. You can,
We're going to stick it to those asphalt guys.
All right, asphalt's going down. All right.
Thank you,
Thank
guys.
you all very much.
And Beth, back to you.
Right. Well, congratulations to all of our Innovation Challenge winners. Your ideas, videos, and especially your passion are just inspiring. I really want to thank Livewire for their production today. So everyone here, let's thank them. They did an awesome job to make sure that this was a smooth process for us. This is the first time that we've done DisruptWell virtually, and I think it went off quite well. Thank you to all of our sponsors, our speakers. I promised our participants that they would be informed and inspired. That was certainly true today, I think. 2020 has presented us with great challenges, and challenge can sometimes equal disruption, which can then lead to innovation. So I thank you for joining us today. I leave you with one of my favorite phrases, which is add light, not heat. Innovation embodies this phrase as we turn to problem solving and critical thinking rather than finger pointing and making bigger problems and creating walls. So add light, not heat. Continue to innovate and disrupt well. We look forward to seeing you again at the 5th annual DisruptWell Summit in 2021. Thank you.